I'm very thankful that you came. I know that ahead of us like a couple days of 3 days, and that's very important that you came. It's very important that you're interested for that. And when we are speaking about Ukrainian program of Pilecki-Institut Volia UA, Freedom UA, it's inspired by the take from Les Kurbats, that's Ukrainian theater director, which was executed in 1937 in Sandermach by Soviets, and he is a part of executed Renaissance in Ukraine. And he told once that the theater is how we would like to see society in the future. And basically, our program, Volia UA, is how we see and would like that Ukraine would be see and start to see already right now in the future and the contemporary times. It's connected because everything connected through the past to the future. To understand what is happening right now in Ukraine, to understand the whole Russian imperialism, it's very important to go back in the past, to read, partly to re-educate, because Eastern studies in Germany, but also in other Western European countries, was quite often seen through Russian lens, through Russian perspective. And the challenge of our program is to rethink this, re-see this. And today, we are continuing what we started yesterday, that's to tell in Untold Roma stories. And today, thank you, Maksym Eristavi, who are joining us and will also give the approach as the author from the book Russian Colonialism 101. And I'm inviting you to the stage, to the microphone.
Thank you so much for coming and joining tonight. Guys, can you also join me, please? We were trying to keep this as low-key as possible and not really formal. And I'm going to talk in the beginning just a tiny bit about the concept, the conversation that we wanted to have today. But before we start, unfortunately, one of our guests today, he cannot join, and therefore we wanted to have an opportunity to have like an opening word from him. Can we also play right away? But before we do, maybe we also intro each other first, who we are and why we're here. This is, I never introduce people, so they can introduce themselves as they want first. Yeah. So Natalie, you go first.
Hello everyone, my pleasure to be on this panel and such an honor to speak here together with Maksym, who is doing a great work. I am Nataliia Tomenko from Ukraine. I'm a Roma activist, cultural heritage expert, and I'm here on behalf of Youth Agency for the Advocacy Roma Culture ARC.
Yanush.
Hello everybody, nice to meet you. I'm Yanush Panchenko, I'm from Ukraine and now I'm staying in Germany. I am a researcher at Institute of Ethnology at Institute of Ethnology Academy, Czech Academy of Science, and also I'm a PhD student in Ukraine.
Thank you. And I'll probably introduce Volodymyr then, since he's not. So Volodymyr Yakovenko is a Romanian-Ukrainian journalist and also part of the ARCA organization, a journalist, feral journalist that I exceptionally admire. Unfortunately, once again, he cannot join, but he recorded for us this brief message. So please listen for him for a bit.
Good afternoon, dear friends. Roma have been living on the territory of Ukraine for about 600 years. Accordingly, Roma have lived through all the hardships together with the other peoples and ethnic groups living here. Roma were involved in the same historical processes as other citizens. The period of colonization of Ukraine by the Russian Empire and then by the Soviet Union is no exception. This had both positive and negative consequences. and almost every Roma family can share their family history for that period. I can give you an example of my family. My grandfather of my father's side had a brick factory in the Kharkiv region. My mother's side family had a post office and owned land in the vicinity of Mirgorod. But after the 1917 revolution, in order not to be repressed as kulaks, both families had to abandon their property and move to a nomadic lifestyle. It was safer that way. During the Holodomor, one part of the family was forced to flee to the Caucasus to escape the famine. My maternal grandfather was accused of killing a neighbor's child, but then it turned out that my grandfather was innocent and that girl was killed and eaten by her family. In the 1930s, one part of the family had the opportunity to create an ensemble at one of the factories in Dnipro, which helped them survive and climb the social ladder. But the other part of the family was repressed by the NKVD, and a black crow came for the head of the family. So we still don't know where my great-grandfather Vasil went. During the Second World War, part of my family was innocently shot by the Nazis. The other part, my grandfather Ivan, fought heroically in the Red Army. These stories can be continued for a long time. Every Roma family has similar stories, and many stories we will never hear again. They are intertwined with the family histories of ethnic Ukrainians, Crimean Tatars, Greek of the Azov Sea region, and other ethnic groups living in Ukraine. So, few people have heard that Roma, along with the Crimean Tatars, were deported from Crimea to Central Asia. Roma from large cities of the Soviet Union were deported to Siberia, ostensibly to settle in compact form, but in reality these were concentration camps where people died of hunger and cold. During the Second World War, Roma who fight in the Red Army were not awarded any honors as an unstable element of society, etc., etc. So, to summarize my speech, we are still struggling with the consequences of colonization. I want to note that Roma, Ukrainians, and other people who lived in the Soviet Union share tragic and joyful historical periods that free people can finally discuss aloud. Thanks for attention.
He's that great, that's why it's such a tragedy that he cannot join us. But Volodymyr starts on exceptionally right note. When I was thinking first about the topic of colonialism, but also putting together the guidebook, Russian Colonialism 101, it was important for me to figure out how do we tell those stories and whom we center. And for many stories that, as Volodymyr said, they're still untold or completely erased and forgotten, the biggest problem is always that they haven't been told by the people representing those communities. For most of the time abroad, all the stories, whether Ukrainian stories, Romani stories, Georgian stories, they were told either by Westerners or outsiders at best, or by Russian colonizer at worst. So the project and the book, it's of course not about me. But it's at the same time, it's exceptionally personal. As a journalist who's been researching the topic of Russian colonialism and covering for almost a decade now, of course, it started from my own decolonization journey. And for people who are coming from Ukraine, as Volodymyr said, it's very hard to establish who you are, where you come from, because so many family members disappeared overnight and nobody talked about it. There's so much identity erasure happening, Russification, that it's very hard to establish who your authentic self is. That's why for Russian Colonialism 101, the journey is always for, not only for me, but for everyone to learn those stories and hear from the people representing those communities, first and foremost. For it won't give you all the answers possible, and especially it's not that an academic conversation either. So it's mostly a conversation starter. I'm myself learning every day something new that Russian Empire did to my people or other people, and I don't have any answers myself. But what this book has also started are a series of conversations. Anywhere we go, we also try to invite people who are represented in the book to tell their stories, their personal stories of how they see themselves, how they see the colonization, how they see just getting back control of their own stories and why it matters. For this book, unfortunately, the Roma stories weren't emphasized as a separate chapter. However, they were told as stories of Ukrainians. And if you were here yesterday or not, we actually talked a lot about what it means to be a Romani Ukrainian, what it means to be a Roma and Ukrainian. And one of the stories that actually really moved me recently, I saw this recent polling among Romani Ukrainian community. And in that polling, it says that 2/3 of people who were polled have someone fighting on the front line within the Romani Ukrainian community. Most as volunteers, not conscripted. Romani community in Ukraine is approximately 400,000 people, so it's around 1% of the country's population. So the natural question, why one of the most marginalized community in Ukraine is so eager to put their lives on the line to defend Ukraine? This is Arsen Mednik, one of these fighters. This is his quote from a recent profile in The Guardian, where he says that Russians weren't paying attention to who was Roma, who was Ukrainian. They just killed everyone, and his motivation is to protect his home and his land. Another high-profile fighter is Viktor Ilchak. He's actually the first highly decorated Ukrainian Roma veteran with an award of bravery. And he also, in his interviews, channels the same message, that the people on the front line, they don't see the ethnic lines. They're all Ukrainians. Whether you're Roma, Ukrainian Azeri, Ukrainian Georgian, ethnic Ukrainian, whatever that means, they consider each other brothers there. As Volodymyr also pointed out, maybe part of the reason is that this is not the first time that it's happening to Ukraine, and all Ukrainians, disregarding of ethnic background, know very well what Russians are bringing and what things are happening when Russians took control of the lands they tried to colonize or control. So these are just one of the things that Roma community as well as Ukrainian community knows very well from Russian occupation. Gaslighting, meaning identity erasure by assimilation, forceful assimilation or Russification, civilizing, which is an important term for any empire. For Romani community, it resulted in cracking down on Romanian nomadism, locking down Roma in state housing under strict movement surveillance, and erasing your identity by banning the Romani language, forcefully baptizing, but also stealing sometimes Roma kids and sending them re-education orphanages. That was the story of my grandfather. I know, Natalie, it's very weird to quote you, but Natalie will tell her story as well later. But here's the quote. It's actually how we met with Natalie. I was interviewing her for a project called Ukrainian Spaces, which is a podcast to decolonize Ukrainian conversations and amplify diverse Ukrainian voices. And Natalie shared her story with her grandfather fighting in World War II. And that quote is, it was 2 years ago, still stays with me very powerfully. So it's not too weird. Can you read that, Natalie? It's your quote.
My grandfather was also on the Second World War front lines, and there were a lot of Roma who participated, but somehow it was hidden. Right now we stand shoulder by shoulder with Ukrainians because it's our land too, and we protect it no matter what. Roma have been living in Ukraine for hundreds of years and were repressed, but when an outsider approaches the family, no one is allowed to attack us.
Thank you. Yanush, and another quote from Yanush, who's with us. When I was reading a lot about your interviews and researching your work as well, which I'm a huge fan, this was quite a recent interview. And when I was thinking about today's conversation, I found this quote. Can you tell me how to pronounce the word, right? Yeah, Muturia, right? So this is something, I read that interview and instantly it was mind-blowing. Can you also read that as well, if you don't mind?
I will try. Some Roma in South Ukraine use the same word for the Russian invaders as for the Nazi soldiers in the Second World War, mutoria. This word means mute, that is, one who cannot be communicated with. Once upon a time, the Nazis will invite Roma to the Best House, which turned out to be a gas chamber. Russians are now inviting Roma to Russia, where they say they will give aid. But in addition to money, the Roma get conscripted as cannon fodder to fight against Ukraine.
Thanks a lot. So these are, the quotes to start with, and I want us to have a conversation with Nataliia, Yanush, about what it means to be Romani Ukrainian today, how it's intertwined with the issue of decolonization, taking back control of your own story, figuring out what's authentic in you and what was forced by the imperial control. But these quotes are exceptionally important to kind of lay the ground for the conversation to be in the right place. And that right place is to remind everyone that this is the reason why there are so many people of various diverse backgrounds, whether Roma, whether Georgian, and any other ethnic backgrounds. Ukraine has 120 ethnicities living in the country, as well as queer people have absolutely no second doubts to go and defend country in various ways because they know the common goal and common enemy is an empire that if empire wins, there's going to be no diversity, no conversations, no any opportunity to have a conversation that we have today. And before we start the conversation, on that note, I would like everyone to invite to have a bit of support for us and have just a minute of silence for everyone who's being murdered as we speak in Ukraine, in Russia committed genocide, because the only reason we're here and we have this privilege of talking and discussing these issues is because someone defending Ukraine. So please join me. Thank you. Okay, guys, so let's then start with the chat. So, Natalie, we featured the quote, and you also very open about the history of your family, generations of people who preserved their, very deep ties to Ukraine, but at the same time are now have to sometimes put, the personal issues on the background and to join the common fight to kick Russia out and preserve Ukrainian sovereignty. So in the last several years, what was the journey for you in terms of figuring out how Ukrainianness really fits your Romani? In any way, has it changed for you? Yeah.
I think I've been Ukrainian since my birth, and all my family is coming from city of Kremenchuk, Poltava region. Everyone was born there. All my ancestors lived there for centuries. Being Ukrainian is part of my identity. Being Roma is part of my identity. Being woman. And did it change for me since the beginning of the war? Yes, I think this part of identity became stronger because there was a need to resist. There was a need to actually speak out loud and say that I'm also Ukrainian, because somehow in the society there is inequality, what we see, and unfairness. When it comes to Roma being served in army, we are needed. But when it comes to equal rights, human rights, they are not always being fulfilled. And that's like inner pain. And right now, speaking about this, having our Roma fighters, volunteers who are helping for defense of Ukraine, it's essential.
And can I ask you also about the art that we would like to share today? Because similarly with the Russian Colonialist guidebook, it's an art book as well first. And when we decided to make an art book out of this, very factual, basically an encyclopedia of recent invasions that Russia did to the neighborhood, connecting it to art was absolutely natural for me, because art remained this anchor for Ukrainians throughout centuries. Through the darkest periods, Ukrainians always would resort to art. And, because not only to process all the horrible stuff that have been happening for generations, but also because sometimes you can code something into art that you otherwise have no luxury to speak or tell or share with words. So I want you, if we can put on the screen the Natalie's part of the visuals. I want you to give us a bit of introduction to this art that you wanted to share today, and how it's related to your maybe decolonization journey or general people who are featured there.
Yeah, this project, Through My Mind to Your Eyes, was established in 2018 by our team of ARCA. It was a first try to collect the stories of children, Roma children from the Second World War, and their testimonies, and have their own insider reflection. Me as Roma artist, also I had a chance and honor to work with these testimonies and produce a digital art pieces. And how it was done, that we were collaborating with Holocaust-Institut in Kiev, who had the collection, access to collection of Shoah Foundation. And there is a specific collection of Roma testimonies. So some of the posters, and if we can start, the stories. So each poster represents a story of survival of the kids during the Second World War, Roma kids. And the first story and the poster you see is a poster of Alexander Kuzmenko, who survived while cleaning the shoes of Nazis in Ukraine. And his painful story about the mother who was single, and he had a small younger brother, and he had to sustain the family. And the next story, if you can scroll, this is a story about the bread. Why it's essential, the bread. When Nazis were leaving Ukraine, they were burning everything on their way. And places of storage of food were the target points. And there is a very strong story that touched my heart of Alexei Nalivaiko, who told that he as a child had to jump into this burning shelter to take a bread for his family. This story is about connection of Jewish identity and Roma identity, and how in a lot of cases Roma were misused, and Nazis were thinking that they are Jewish. They both were eliminated anyway, but this story about a girl, Olena Kantemirova, who told that the humanity actually saved her, because her brother, older brother, he had a friend who was a polizei, and this polizei was escorting all the Jewish kids to the line to be killed, and then he recognized this Roma girl. He put his jacket on her shoulders, and he said her, "Go home." So that's how her life was saved. This story is about Roma kids who were going from house to house, Ukrainian houses, and collecting some food. And that's how mostly Roma families were surviving. And this story for me represents like this close connection of Ukrainian society, Roma. It's actually one. There is human beings that were helping each other for centuries, but somehow when it comes to nowadays reality, somehow we are not included into the whole narrative of Ukrainian society. Yeah, that was the story of Lyubov Tomenko. And this is a very scary story about a family where there were 3 kids. And it was a winter during the Second World War. There was no food, and it was super cold in Ukraine those ages. And they had to cut the wooden door of the house in order to heat the house and to stay somehow alive. And the smallest, the youngest sister, she was frozen and she died. And two older kids, they just put her in outside, and then dogs ate her. It was Halina Belashenko. And this is the story of my grandfather, and it's my personal attachment to the whole project. The story of my grandfather is unique in a way that it's a bit contradictional to the narrative that exists, that Nazis were killing Roma. In my family story, Nazis saved my family. How it was, as my grandfather told, and it was preserved as an oral history in family, that my grandfather was about 2 years old in the city of Kremenchuk when Nazis were leaving. They were crossing the Kremenchuk bridge and burning everything on their way. When family of my grandfather, grandfather, he used to ride horse, the wagon, and the SS, they saw that there are Roma because of visible features of Roma identity, darker skin, they were big family, they were talking Romani language, and SS said, put them down on the bridge and kill. But then one Nazi officer, as my grandfather told, a very tall guy in a black leather jacket, came. And that's how he recalled. He was just 2 years old, and most probably he didn't remember this, but that's how the family narratives were preserved and passed through generations. So this German officer, they said something in German, Kinder, Kinder, you have a Kinder, so fast the bridge, you have 5 Minuten. And they crossed the bridge, and why it happened? Because he also, this German officer, he showed a picture, photograph of his child that is somewhere there in Germany waiting for him. And for me, it's a sign of humanity. And so when we talk about humanity and in general colonialism and fascism, where is the humanity? All the stories have both sides. And talking about Roma community, we have a lot of relatives in Russia. But somehow when the war started, we lost the connection with most of them because of politics, because of different reasons. And for me, it's a pain, because for me, we are all humans.
Thank you, Natalie, for sharing. Yanush, I will ask you the next question, because for some of the people here, it would be might be a tad confusing, because we switch between the stories of Ukrainian colonization by Nazi Germany and then going to Russian colonization and back and forth. For us, it's very natural. Of course, I haven't lived through World War II, but my grandparents, I have still one surviving grandmother who lived through both. And in her hand, it's quite similar events that are happening. She always compares what she survived, how she survived. She's 94, so sometimes she mixes up like Putin, Hitler, Stalin. All it's in her head. But through that, I definitely see that, you know, for them, it's related, it's connected. Through your work, you also pointed out, and yourself, you also survived Russian occupation. Is it also connected in your head the same way as it is for our grandparents, and why?
Yeah, you know, Second World War is very big topic in Roma community, and Roma people speak a lot about this, and even little child know about Second World War and about Roma genocide in Roma community. And I came from Kakhovka. It's a city. It is under Russian occupation still, and it's under occupation from the first day of the war. And when Russian invasion began, some people, they don't have an idea what to do, to leave the city or to stay in the city. And some of these people decide to leave and to go to some other region of Ukraine. And some decide to stay. And my family, those people who decide to stay, to stay. And it was very, we feel very powerless, and we don't know what to do. Every people, because we did not have the same experience what to do in wartime, and that's why people start to gather together in one house, 2, 3, 5 families, and this thing happened also with my family. And for my own family consists of 2 persons, my mother and me. But first 2 months we lived in our house 12 people. And one of these people who lived with us was a very old Roma woman. She was a child when Second World War began, and she she doesn't have her own memories about Second World War, but she know a lot about this war from her oldest brothers and parents. And every time when Russians tanks went through our street, she reflexively cry and say, "Germans are coming. Germans are shooting." And they said, "Oh, no Germans, Russians." And she also afraid and speak a lot about, she worried, "I hope it would not be like that war, where they killed and deport Roma to Siberia." And also, this grandmother told me a story. During the Second World War, Soviet soldier came to their house, and he was all wounded and beaten, and he was cut out in his chest star. And my great grandfather, it's this woman that I said is the sister of my grandfather. And my great grandfather family looked to this soldier, took him in, and start to heal this soldier. And it turned out later that this Soviet soldier had escaped from Nazi prison and prison camp and came to the village and found the first house and came. And it was the house of my great grandfather and the house of this old woman who was in our house in this time of Russian invasion, I mean in first days. And the Romani family took him, this Soviet soldier healed him, and then the soldier left. And now, in current Russian war in Ukraine, when Kherson and the right bank Kherson region was liberated, Ukrainian army came to some villages in right bank, and they found a Roma house and asked to stay with Roma in Roma house. And it was very poor Romani family. And they were so poor, they don't have nothing to eat for these days. And Ukrainian soldiers said, okay, we need some place to stay, and we need some place to wash our clothes and to have some food. We will live and we will stay with you in your house. We will bring food for you, and you will cook this food, and we will eat it together. So the soldier stayed in this Romani house 3 or 4 months, and then they left. That's why this is 2 wars: Second World War and Russian invasion. Now in Roma, it's associated very much. And then when I was in a refugee camp in Germany, and I spoke to also a Romani woman, she was from Mariupol, and I asked her, "How are you? What about your city?" And she said, "I left, everything bad." And I said, "Do you know the story that Roma stole the Russian tank?" She said, "Yeah, I know. Roma stole this German tanks. No, not Germans. I mean Russian tanks. Yeah, sorry. Everything mixed in my head."
Thank you. So before we actually usually try to make it as engaging as possible and take as many questions as you might have, because these topics are complex. But once again, we really wanted to center it on the stories that are untold. For any of us, sharing the personal stories from our family stories, those stories that we're still trying to learn, it is integral part to decolonization. it's not comfortable at all, and it's very painful, especially when you try to go through all the hubris of things you thought was true, but it wasn't, or the truth that was hidden from you, or the things that you were educated differently. But at the same time, it's also partially healing for us to connect the dots between something that happened before, something that is happening now. In heads of Ukrainians, it is all interconnected. Part of the reason why Ukrainians come back all the time, especially for older generations, to those events in World War II, because this is something that is profoundly misunderstood abroad, that with the end of World War II, for many places in Europe, it was liberation and freedom. For places like Ukraine or wherever Russia went, it was a change of one colonizer by another. So this is an ongoing, continuous story for all of us. That's why it's so important to go back to the stories of our grandparents that unfortunately weren't told. They did not have opportunity to tell them. And in a way for us to relearning and telling them is a path to justice, and also for you guys to understand better what is this war is about, when it started, and what it is at stake. So let's just make it informal and maybe start with questions that you guys have to Natalie, to Yanush, to me. Please, especially if you have questions about the Romani heritage, decolonization, within the Romani community, that would be the perfect start. So just raise your hand. There is a mic behind. Can we also put the illustrations on the back? Thank you.
So hi, my name's Liam. I'm a Canadian historian of Eastern Europe, or I'm training to be one. And I want to thank you all for coming to Berlin to share your stories. I think it's super important that you guys show up and tell the German public about all of this. But my question is for you, Natalie. Through a series of coincidences, I've actually been to Kremenchuk, where you're from. And in the center of Kremenchuk, as you would surely know, there are these lots of commemorative plaques and statues commemorating the liberation of Kremenchuk by the Red Army. And everything's still in Ukrainian, but you know, when I was there last fall, I thought this was a bit puzzling because you're in the center of this full-scale invasion and you see commemoration of an army where that history is being abused in order to justify the new invasion. So my question is as somebody from this place specifically, how does that long street with the park in the middle look like to you after the end of the full-scale invasion? Do you change things up, or is that too painful, or should we leave things as it is? That's just from a local Kremenchuk person perspective, I would just like to know your thoughts on that.
As far as you're talking about Kremenchuk, I'm becoming emotional, and maybe I cannot understand your question right. But what I can say, I mean, the history of Kremenchuk is mostly was Jewish population there. That's why a lot of citizens were exterminated. And I was trying to work with city archives and look what about Roma population there. Unfortunately, no data available. Yeah, I probably didn't answer on your question.
Yeah, I think there is also very connected all the time. A lot of people point out to the physical remnants of various empires. Now in Ukraine, there's a very intense process of physical decolonization as well. People rename the streets, the city councils rename the streets, take down the monuments and everything. There is urge for people to see surroundings that represents their truth and their stories. And once again, some foreigners ask, like, why now, right? Why it wasn't 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Although the falling of Russian and Soviet monuments began 10 years ago with the Maidan revolution. But I think that it's important because one of the practical aspects how colonialism works is that empires also come and change surroundings, absolutely unrecognizable. So, when you go to Ukrainian cities, there's a fantastic documentary came out called Year on Donbass that it looks into urban history of Eastern Ukraine. This platform for Russian imperial mythology. And they often show how the buildings that were built under Russian occupation would just be in the center and protect, and not protect, but completely shield the historical buildings from pre-Russian times, or the times that do not speak of empire in such way. So I think now for Ukrainians, they also want their truth to be represented. So you do not walk on the streets that are named after Russian colonizers. You don't see the monuments to someone who would be xenophobic or did not recognize you as a separate people, and so on and so forth. So, of course, this, just connected to this question because we often have them. Maybe Yanush, do you want to add anything? Okay, we can take another questions.
You also? Well, anyway, I've got my name is Johannes. I've got 3 questions, I guess, last count.
Can we go one reply, another reply, so we don't forget all of them as well?
Yeah, maybe the one is maybe a very quick one. It seems when you say 400,000 Roma live in Ukraine, that means the Roma are actually the largest minority. I guess more than Crimean Tatars, more than Poles. Is that understanding correct?
Need to educate myself. Yeah, probably. I don't know what's the amount of. I definitely Karimli is bigger.
I think Crimean Tatars like 270,000 or so.
No, much bigger.
Yeah, okay.
But anyway,
well,
sorry.
I may add some few words. There is no real statistics about how many Roma are living in Ukraine and in general in Europe because of huge anti-Gypsyism and people afraid to declare themselves as Roma. So they rather call themselves Georgians, Armenians, Azerbaijani, Jewish, but not Roma.
And the second question would be also a rather short technical one, which is my understanding correct that the kind of the center of settlement for kind of the geographical distribution of Roma is such that actually most have been living in the south and the east of the country, or is it equally distributed amongst Ukraine?
If you talk about population of Roma in Ukraine, it's spread around the country. If you talk about the visible, what we see in media, pictures of underprivileged Roma settlements on western part of Ukraine, that was very catchy and what is mostly you see here in Western Europe. But in central parts there are a lot of Roma, west, east, everywhere, but they are not living there in settlements.
And maybe the third question is that I have is a bit more difficult because I've been working with indigenous peoples in Russia, and one of our partner organizations there has always been ADC Memorial, which is kind of the anti-discrimination center now based in, I think, Brussels. And they have been working a lot with Roma communities in Russia and have brought their grievances to UN treaty bodies and other human rights mechanisms. And of course, I mean, in Russia, Roma are like really, really heavily discriminated. So I just wonder, is there any kind of contact, any kind of interaction with Roma activists from Russia, mostly in exile, I guess, now? Or how would you relate to them?
Shall I? Not really, no contact these days. It's impossible, from my perspective.
Yeah, I would like to add a little. Officially in Ukraine, 37,000 Roma people. it's officially, but really don't know. Some NGOs said there's 200,000 Roma or 800,000 Roma, and but the main region with the biggest population of Roma in Ukraine is Transcarpathia and Odessa region, and also before the war in 2014, it was also Donetsk region. But now, from the last 8 years, a lot of Roma left this region. It's anymore not. It was like informal cultural center of Roma, Donetsk region. But now it's not anymore, not like this. And about Russian activists, for example, before the big war, full invasion in Ukraine, I had some connection with Roma activists from Russia, but now not, because in Ukraine we have NGO, it's a non-governmental organization, and in Russia they work in some other way. They work like Gongo. It's a pro-government organization, and they it's like they also try to promote propaganda things, Kremlin things, and like this. That's why we don't have any connection anymore. And really, I had some friends, really Roma from Russia, but and I was in some chat from Ukrainian and Russia activists. And from the first day of invasion, I was under occupation, and they text something. Don't worry, our president's the best. Our president will do everything in the best way. And I did not have, and I don't have any wish to connect to these people.
So there are no independent activists?
Yeah, there are some independent activists, but they left Russia. Not activists, they sciences. So they have some problem also in Russia.
Thank you. Before we go to other question, while we are listening to the answers and stories, these are also illustrations from the book done by wartime Ukrainian artists. So there are 10 artists who worked during the ongoing Russian invasion in Ukraine to illustrate the chapters for the guidebook. And part of the reason why there are illustrations is also what we've been also discussing a lot. When I was trying to research, and as a journalist, it was important for me to put as much indigenous knowledge into it, references, cross-links, works. It was hard for me to find lots of visuals, period, just because part of the Russian tactic is always to erase a lot of indigenous knowledge when they occupy the land. I come from also southern Ukraine. My village where I was born and grew up is unfortunately occupied. And while I was working on this book and Russian tanks were rolled into our village, the first thing they did, they went into archives, they burned Ukrainian language books, they took away lots of documents. In some of our houses even, they would burn family albums. Not because it was direct order from Putin to do so, to go to my house and burn family album, just because it's pattern of really serial, almost automatic behavior to erase memories on the land when you, where you try to colonize. Okay, guys, next questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I have, I think, 2 questions which I would like. I'm not sure if I got it right. So when you talk about decolonization, it's not about Roma decolonization, it's about Ukraine altogether? So it's about decolonizing Ukraine? Or are you only talking about Roma?
For us, it's indistinguishable because we're Ukrainians first. And, being Ukrainian is...
Yeah, there was written decolonizing Roma, Ukraine or something like that. I would like to ask you something as well. When Donetsk was invaded, I was traveling there and I was going to Zhytomyr and then to Lviv. And I had the feeling the situation was different at that time. For example, there were Roma refugees from the Donetsk as well. And I had, in my observation, they were treated quite differently. So there was, for example, a Roma camp at the station of Zhytomyr. I was interviewing the one who was responsible for minorities in Ukraine. She was from Poland, and she was very reserved when it came to Roma. And in my observation, this is something that really changed in 2020, after February 2022, so that there is like more is. I have the feeling there's a strong nation-building process going on, and this is the part where Roma people become part of Ukraine. I have the feeling something happened in between. Would you agree to that? I know it from Jewish refugees who were giving those stories that now we are all Ukraine, but it wasn't like that all the time, and it's something the war brought with it as creating the nation itself. Would you agree to that? Do you understand what I mean?
I can try to reflect somehow. Roma have been in Ukraine. They were regarding themselves as Ukrainians all the time. It's another question whether the state regards us as Ukrainians. And but the situation changed since 2014, as Yanush told. A lot of Roma from Donbass, Mariupol, they moved to central part of Ukraine. That's why, like also a big concentration of popularity is there. And the situation within the full-scale invasion changed. I mean, this whole 20 years, it's a work of Roma activists, really. If not our colleagues, we don't know if we will have an opportunity to sit here with Yanush and talk openly. Really, it's decades of work of activists who are lobbying the interests, and right now our job is to lobby interests to Roma to be included in all the processes of recovery of Ukraine. That's why we are here speaking, because now these big conferences are happening. And within the full-scale invasion, how the situation changed, that Roma went into Ukrainian armed forces, and it's visible. Ukrainian media now it's publishing it, promoting it. It's a good image. That's how we are getting into national discourse. Better later than never. Very sad.
Do you want to do it? Or no? Okay. I can only add that the situation with the, maybe on a bit personal level, as someone who never fully identified as Ukrainian up until after Maidan, but even later, as someone who was brought up as a Russian-speaking in a Ukrainian-speaking family, and was conditioned to, to this notion that passing as a Russian is the way to go. So you don't have an accent, so you look more, Russian. For me, of course, after the full-scale invasion, switching to fully starting learning Ukrainian and identifying 100% Ukrainian was, of course, also a defining moment. I come from very, as well, diverse background, so there were lots of choices, so to say, but becoming Ukrainian or identified Ukrainian was definitely a choice. And once again, I think it's a very important message about Ukrainian decolonization in general, not only connecting to your roots, but what being Ukrainian stands for. And mostly this is about values of freedom, democracy, equality. So this is very intermixed process for everyone. Yes, we have another question.
Hi, Maksym. One question, Nataliia, in the meantime, partly answered, but it would be primarily a question to Yanush and to Nataliia, is what do you expect from the society in Ukraine, but also from the politics, recognizing the contribution of Roma, not only now during the war, during the full-scale invasion, that so many Roma are fighting in the Ukraine armed forces or others doing other things to support Ukraine, but in general that you are really accepted and recognized as an integral part of Ukraine. What do you expect from the society to do, and what do you expect from politics to do? My second question goes more to Maksym. It now came to my mind, it's not fully thought out. Yeah? When you talk about decolonizing, what do you think about Transcarpathia, which is colonized by the Hungarians in a certain way? And in particular, when we think about Roma, yeah, the Roma go to Hungarian language school. It's the first language of the Roma in Transcarpathia is Hungarian. You have the worst living conditions probably in this area. You have the segregated school in this area where Roma never can go to a real school or very seldom and have a bad starting point for the rest of their life. So what do you think about the situation there? Would you also include it in your work somehow?
Thank you for your question. I hope Ukrainian government and Ukrainian society will not forget about Roma, and because a lot of Roma joined to Ukrainian army and work like volunteer, and really, to be honest, Roma live in any European countries, and Roma very feel a lot of xenophobia in Ukraine, and it was the most marginalized group in Ukraine before the war. And in this way, we can think Roma just can take their back and go to Europe or to some other country, and that's all. And when I took interview with Arsen Mednik, Maksym spoke about this guy. He joined the Ukrainian army. He was the first Roma who joined the Ukrainian army, and he said, "I'm fight not only for myself and for my people. I mean, for Roma. I fight for my Ukrainian friends, for Ukrainians, and I hope Ukrainian people will change their mind because of me and because of guy like me, and they will not forget this."
You, do you have anything to add?
Maybe not much to Stefan's, but rather reflection on what Yanush said. I have my also academic parts where I'm researching about Roma heritage and how it's changing these days during the war, and what is actually heritage for Roma people by asking community members. And there is this very romanticized image that Roma are nomads and they are not attached to the land. And what I see these days, they attached. People so attached to their houses. House itself is like family. And why people are not leaving Ukraine, it's like this physical space is so important, because around this physical space there are a lot of intangible things, there are community. And when they are leaving even Ukraine because of occupation, many reasons, there is this strong attachment, they want to come to Ukraine. And they are waiting, when this war will finish, when? But then when they don't have a place to come back. And what we expect from the government, that we would have Ukraine, newborn Ukraine, or reborn Ukraine, with less discrimination. We understand that it cannot be erased like this. But if we already start to work on anti-Gypsyism, that we acknowledge that it exists as in every European countries, we hope we will access the European Union soon. So let's prepare the society for this and create a space where Roma will actually come and rebuild the Ukraine in different areas.
Yeah, and for example, after the war, I would like to see some like this. For example, when students study in school and they study history of Ukraine, and they will study about heroes, current heroes of the war, and there will be a lot of names, and I would like to see it. I'm like, this is Arsen Medic, and he is Roma, and he is fought for Ukraine, and not only just name. I would like to see that government or society, education system show that this is Roma. And in a reconstruction period, a lot of Roma live very poor. For example, in my town, and in some parts of city in Roma area, something like this, they don't have a road on their street, and they don't have water in some villages. And when I said I hope Ukrainian government will not forget about Roma, I mean this: they will reconstruct Ukraine, and they will reconstruct everything, not only in some parts of Ukraine or some parts of city, even in Roma areas. I mean, in Roma villages or something like this. That's I mean.
Probably very quickly to the question that was addressed to me on the Western colonialism in Western Ukraine, which once again now wasn't not only conversation about Austro-Hungarians but also Germans. I focus on Russian colonialism, and I'm always super clear that I don't speak about things I have no idea about. Of course, I am curious, and lots of Ukrainians now discovering this history that wasn't told, wasn't shared with us in many ways. That's a very important one. Part of the reason why we need to amplify Ukrainian scholars and indigenous scholars talking about the stories, about these developments, because it's part of lived experiences, not only opinions. And I cannot tell you how many Ukrainian scholars would tell me, friends and not, all the time stories, which are similar to other scholars from the region, that they were told many times that it's not serious when you research your own people, that let Westerners and Russians do that. And you should do, I don't know, philosophy or some Western literature or whatnot. So allowing those people to actually lead those studies, we often know that Eastern European or Slavic studies or whatever they called usually have nothing to do with actual people who they're studying, and usually are occupied by people coming from Western or Russian background. But most importantly, these conversations are happening in Ukraine. They won't be happening if tomorrow Ukraine falls. So the only way to support these conversations, so we have conversations about diversity or any opportunity to talk, debate, fight for our rights, is to arm Ukraine at the moment. So this would be the best way to ensure that we keep having these conversations.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Дуже вам дякую, Максим. Просто,
Будь ласка.
I have two questions, and I'll start with the first, because when you're talking about improving the conditions for Roma people in Ukraine and fighting discrimination, this talk is on a very political discourse level, but I was thinking of what individual strategies would you, recommend? What can we do within our families, on a more micro level? How can we, have better conversations and fight those stereotypes on a more individual level in Ukraine? That's the first question. Yeah.
Whoever wants.
Just something what first came to my mind, that mostly the stereotypes about Roma exist when people never actually talk to Roma. So when I have people around me, Ukrainians, and they say, but you are different Roma. There are those Roma and you are different. No, we are all same. Maybe there are some social class which is different, but we are all Roma. I mean, we have our own specifics. There are many Roma groups in Ukraine who are different by traditions, by religion, by the locality where they live, social class, Romani dialects, but we are all together. starting to speak in families, meeting Roma people in real life, to fight with prejudices on this like bottom up is really good approach, I think.
You know, I think from one side, stereotypes, it's a normal part of our life, because everyone has some stereotypes. Not even Ukrainians have stereotypes for Roma. Also, Roma sometimes have stereotypes for Ukrainians. One Roma group have stereotypes to another Roma group. For example, I was a teacher in the school, a secondary school, and it was a specific school, a secondary school, but there are a lot of Roma students, for maybe 30%. And also I work in informal education with Roma students, but in other part of region of the city. It was the other Roma group. It was Servoria, and I belong to Servoria too. And Servoria very discriminate Crimean Roma, but really they didn't know nothing about these people. But we live in one city, and the same thing Crimean Roma think something like this about our. And when I made some lessons for these children together, and they one guy said me, you know, Crimean Roma not so bad. They like us, nothing specific. So stereotypes from the one side, it's normal part of our life, but we need to explore this world to explore different people, and this is time when everything is open for people, and we can change and our mind and to break any stereotypes in a very easy way.
But also, guys, wouldn't you agree that, you know, of course we have 1 bazillion stereotypes about, you know, people living in Ukraine, each other, but part of the manifestation of imperialism and empire is this rigid system of controlling who's who and telling you who's who and in which kind of class, status, quality in this hierarchy you are. Of course, Russians are there, but you know, some people are second class, some people are third class, and it's really so rigid that you are brought up with these stereotypes that play into empire's hands because they need to have this a bit competition, who's better, who's not, who's hated, so people can channel also their frustrations. You know, there's so much research also on pogroms and how they were instrumentalized, often used. Of course, it doesn't mean that people do not have hatred or racism, but how it was always used within the empire to pit each other. In many of these chapters in the book, you know, part of the strategy to invade is to first stoke in divide and say whether it's ethnic or class, or, you know, somebody is oppressed will come to liberate you. So even I grew up, you know, having all these myths that were there to say, well, you know, to basically pit us against each other.
You know, in nowadays Russia, or maybe last 30 years Russia, they also choose some the main enemy. After the Chechen war, the main enemy was Chechens, and Russian television show Chechens like this and like that. They do this and that, and they make this propaganda for Chechens. Then they found some other goal. It was a period when the main enemy of Russia was Roma, and they made this really very bad film, Bremia Tsigan. I don't know how to say it in English. And 3-hour film for it was showed for all government channels on TV. And the main things it's Roma, all Roma sell drugs, and 3 hours about this. And only about this. And they invite Roma scientists, Russian Roma science. We will make some good film about Roma. And then they cut one and this, and it looked like some Roma science said, yeah, really, all our Roma sell drugs. So they decide to make the Roma is the main enemies. And even I saw one Russian channel, REN-TV, and they took a video from my brother's wedding in Ukraine. And so you see there is how say that? You see there is drug dealers event, but it's wedding for my brother in Ukraine. And now they change the goal. The main enemy is Ukrainians.
Guys, anyone else has questions? Or you had the second one?
Yeah, right. I was just wondering if you could share some personal experience of self-decolonization, because it's also like a process that I am still going through, but that started since the beginning of the full-scale war as someone from Odessa, or born in Odessa, so a Russian-speaking family, very much shaped by Russian-speaking cultural products and all of that. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Maybe you, about maybe Russian language or any kind of finding little things that helps you to feel more Ukrainian within? Because I hate talking, about myself as a journalist, so I always would love to hear other stories better.
Before the full-scale invasion, being from central part of Ukraine, I could allow myself still to talk, because in Kremenchuk we speak Surjik. It's a mix of Ukrainian, Russian, and in my family it's also additionally Romani dialect, so it's like real Surjik. When the full-scale invasion started, I decided for myself that I will speak Ukrainian or English. And now there is another decolonization level comes, because my family do not speak clean Romani language, because it was lost due to oppression and many other reasons. But now I'm have this wish to learn the language and also to promote it for younger generations, because many of us youngsters, we do not speak. And it's already a loss of heritage. And what will be following decade when a lot of Roma may assimilate.
I asked Maksym to translate the question. The main thing for me, I have a brother, and my brother joined the Ukrainian army, and it's the main thing to feel me Ukrainian and Ukrainian Roma, and I know everything about this war from the front line. But now he left the army for maybe 4 or 3 months. But it's the main thing for me, because I have friends, not only Roma, only friends who decide to join Ukrainian army. It's the main thing for me to feel through these people.
Yeah, I think also for Westerners, there's such intense conversation happening in Ukraine. So, when you check top podcasts or, top videos on YouTube or Apple Podcasts, and it was, maybe not now, but maybe several months ago, I would open, and the first podcast will be about decolonization, but from the more like lifestyle view, because there are lots of questions that are open to Ukrainians. Like, how do you, what kind of language you use in situations? Do you reject the history within your family that supported the empire? Anyways, there are a bazillion questions every day that you ask yourself how to be more authentic. And that's why there's like more conversation about feelings. It's also a very millennial podcast about feelings, how I feel, what are my emotions about. And the second most popular at the time was podcast about literature, decolonization, because some literature we also read in the schools. The Ukraine was more lucky than some other colonized nations, where the nation is so big, the culture is so rich and so ancient, you cannot possibly fully erase it. So they would do these censored versions, something that you read. Taras Shevchenko, Ukrainian made the most famous anti-colonial writer. He was taught in the schools, but only within the prism and the versions that would not conflict with the empire. So now you need to all reread that as well, because once again, as with art, but also with literature, lots of people were coding the messages 100 years ago, 200 years ago, that I read when I wasn't, going through decolonization, didn't understand, was boring or sad or depressing. Now I read as if someone next to me wrote it, and I understand everything, and it empowers me. It's like, wow, how come I've never seen that before in the same text? So, this is very multifaceted, and there are so many people have so many little rituals, either reading more or listening to music, or going, if you have your grandparents survived, having conversations with them to try to figure out and whatnot. You want to also add?
Yeah, I also want to add. It's important for me to speak about this war from Roma perspective, because this is war, it has different voices. And when Roma speak about the war from their perspective, it's show something else, and that's why it's very important for me, like for Roma and Ukrainian Roma, to speak about Russian invasion in Ukraine, about their crimes in Ukraine, from not like only like Roma or like Ukrainian Roma. And also I like to translate Ukrainian poetry to Romani language.
Other questions? I also remember this thing that a lot of Ukrainians now, for example, learning Kyrmly, Crimean Tatar language, part of the decolonization, a lot of foreigners, especially from former Russian colonies, learning Ukrainian as well as part of decolonization. So for Ukrainians, it's also natural to learn more about the people who were also oppressed by the same oppressor. And I think this explains a lot of this curiosity, once again, about different cultures, even within our own country. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's.
I'm not moderator, so you just
very true. Because last time
I already spoke once, so I'm not sure whether it's appropriate. But
yeah.
Few people last time, Ukrainian, they found me on social media and write me. So I would like to know more about Roma people in Ukraine. I would like to learn Romani language. And I say, okay, but why do you need it? You can learn English, Spanish, Arabic. Why do you need Romani language? Just for tolerance, for Ukrainian Roma.
Okay, questions. Yeah, you had question. Yeah.
Yeah, or maybe a remark, or well, it's actually a question, and that's because of my background, like with having worked with indigenous peoples in Russia, and there the very strange thing there is that for those people who are still in the country, this notion that they are colonized, that they're in a colonial situation, is rather bewildering. So only those in exile start thinking about that they are actually in a colonial situation, and Russia is Europe's last colonial empire, and usually colonial empires at some point they fall apart, they cease to exist. And I just wonder what your perspective is. Can there actually be a true liberation of Ukraine without finally ending this terrible colonial empire, without also a free Bashkortostan, a free Buryatia, a free Sakha, and also Sarkadvelo, Kazakhstan, all of them becoming fully free from this Russian terror? Or can you actually, maybe, sorry, I'm rambling a bit, but one of the first things I heard from my friends who were still in Russia when the war started, or when the full-scale invasion started, is, well, the Ukrainians are also fighting for us. But at the same time, I felt that, well, that's a huge burden on the Ukrainians. If everybody expects the Ukrainians to finally kind of destroy this terrible colonial empire, don't the other peoples also have to do something? And I just wonder, so sorry, I'm rambling a bit, and maybe I should just make, I just wonder what your view on that is. How is this going to play out?
Maybe we have in the audience anyone representing indigenous people. Yeah, I think it's the better. Yeah. You can take mine.
Thank you. My name is Sasek. I'm coordinator of decolonial projects here in Berlin. We have indigenous community, nomads. We are different people from Sakha, Bashkortostan, and Buryatia and Kalmykia, Tiva, and Caucasus also. And I wanted to compliment your book. It was very well accepted in the community. Thank you very much for writing so respectfully and so informative about the colonization of our republics. Yeah, I agree that it's a very big burden on Ukrainians. And you see Ukrainians are writing books about Russian colonization, about colonization of Siberia and Caucasus and so on. And then I haven't seen such books written by Russian authors. I know that Buryat authors historians are trying to write it, but there is no finances for that, there is no resources for that. Also, the recent European Union Parliament resolution about democratization, how was it? The condition for democratization of Russia is decolonization of Russia. That was a resolution of European Parliament. And I know that it was also forced and supported by Ukrainians together with indigenous people of Russia. So I think decolonization is, I totally agree, decolonization is a condition for democratization. There is no democratization of Russia without decolonization of Russia, political and cultural and so on. And thank you very much for your stories. It's so touching and it's so humbling, and I can totally relate when you say you are not like when you were talking about discrimination stories, and you said you are different than all over the Romas because you are like us, because we hear it a lot also in Russia.
Thank you. When you say that Ukrainians, publish or do the work on the decolonization, trying to put spotlight not only on on themselves but also on other colonized people previously or currently colonized, it's also incredibly hard to go against the establishment outside, especially in the Western world, when once again all these studies, all the narratives, people like to celebrate Russian so great culture without looking critically at it. So just publishing Ukrainian, even with so much attention because of ongoing genocide is on Ukraine, is incredibly hard. Nobody wanted to publish it in the West. So my publisher is a Ukrainian publisher, and we had to fundraise and put a book together. And now we're trying to do the proper distribution. That's why it's still hard to get. Everybody wants to get it, but we can just, do not have opportunities to print as quickly and distribute, because still there is a lot of gaslighting happening. Like, are you sure that you're gonna call it colonization? Because according to Western definition of colonization, this is what Westerners did to people of color in global South. It must not be colonization, and so on and so on. So I think if Ukrainians face so much while Ukrainians are sacrificing their lives, so we have this privilege to talk about it, lots of people who are from smaller communities or communities that were damaged much more severely by colonization than Russians. You know, 2/3 of the people wiped out, deported, like Keremli people who were deported overnight, half of the nation died. So, of course, they have even less opportunities to find that within the community strength and then fight not only Russian propaganda, but also Western as well, blindness. And refusal to see colonization and see imperialism in today's Russia, in the previous Russia. Yeah.
Just, I was observing what is decolonization for Roma in Ukraine, and I just came up with some concept in my mind, very connected to the Roma genocide during the Second World War. For me, every time when we go to Auschwitz-Birkenau, and we do go there on the 2nd of August, there is a day of remembrance of victims of Roma. And a lot of Roma youngsters come there on a big event of Dik Hanabister, remember and never forget. We gather there to recall our ancestors, and every time I'm in these concentration camps having a guiding tour, I'm amazed how, like those years, people who were living around the concentration camps, they for sure they saw what was happening, but they were silent. And for me, the colonization that would happen if nowadays Europe is not silent, because these lozungs we will find until the last Ukrainian, it recalls something from those years. Why? Why Europe allowing until the last Ukrainian? Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Do you have any last questions, maybe? And then I think we will wrap it up. I wanted just to thank you guys once again for sharing these stories. It's always an experiment for us when we go on different book shows and doing different kind of events. It's always different for us, but the foundation of it is once again to start a conversation, to share with you stories you've never heard, to open up you to thinking differently about what is happening. When I go on these book shows, I love to go to bookstores as well, to see like what kind of authors are represented there from Ukraine, from the regions that are colonized. You know, the Berlin I go often, but today I went to bookstore just once again to double check, to bookstore, and I enter, and it's, I'm not gonna name names, but it's a big bookstore, and I enter, and there are two shelves right away in the center. One is a Ukraine shelf, and the other is Russian language shelf. And I'm like, okay, at least there is like Ukraine shelf. So I go to Ukraine shelf and I see all the books in Ukraine colors and everything. There's no one who's actually Ukrainian there. There are Westerners, there are some Russians, there is like a book about Navalny for some reason there. And for me, it was very, once again, this reality check that it's not that nothing is out there. You know, there are 400 citations in the book, no Russians, just, you know, indigenous knowledge, the authors, the great scholars coming from the region like Botakos Kasembekova, Oksana Zabushka, Eva Thompson, all these names that are existing there. As myself, they struggle to get published, but even if they get published, their books do not get, you know, recognized, put on the bookshelves and so on and so on. It's hard to publish book as it is. Then you have to fight also this discrimination. So what would I ask from you? Not only to learn more about these indigenous authors, about these names. We have you can find the information about the book on where to find the book on RussianColonialism.net, but we also have a storytelling hub that basically you can find lots of information connected to the book about these names. But also if you have favorite bookstore, you go there, you don't see Ukrainian names there, please request it, because that's what bookstores often tell us in the West. Well, there's no demand. Nobody ever comes and say, I want to read Kazakh or Ukrainian author. So you have an actual power to change that, especially in free societies, and I encourage you to use it. And also, I encourage you to keep supporting Ukraine in any way possible by sharing information, sharing the names, sharing the fundraisers, because once again, if Ukraine falls, then there's going to be no conversations like these. There are going to be just an open mass grave without any debates and without any privileges for us to talk about these issues and sharing our untold stories. Thank you once again, and Slava Ukraini!